You've probably eaten rice and eggs and thought nothing of it. A fried egg over a bowl of rice. Maybe soy sauce, maybe hot sauce, maybe just butter and salt. It feels like the most basic food on earth. Peasant food. Nothing food. Here's what they don't tell you. That bowl sits on top of one of the most overlooked knowledge transfers in American history, and the people who carried that knowledge across an ocean were never credited for it. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the record barely mentions them at all. Here's the story most people hear, if they hear one at all. The year is 1685. A ship, blown off course from Madagascar, limps into Charleston Harbor for repairs. According to popular legend, the captain, sometimes named as John Thurber, gives a colonist, Dr. Henry Woodward, a small sack of rice seed as thanks. Woodward plants it. It grows. Within decades, Carolina rice becomes one of the most valuable crops in the British Empire. Charming story, convenient story. Except there's no surviving 1685 document that actually describes it happening. The story shows up decades later, retold and retold, gaining detail each time it's told. And here's the number that should stop you. By the time this lucky gift supposedly happened, people from West Africa's rice-growing regions had already been arriving in Carolina for years, people who didn't need a shipwreck to know how to grow rice. So why does the story start with a ship? Along the coast of what's now Senegal, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, communities had farmed rice for over 1,000 years before a single English ship reached Carolina. Traders even had a name for this stretch of coastline on their shipping manifests, the Rice Coast. That's not a coincidence. Historian Judith Carney's research shows that captives from this specific region were deliberately sought out, not just for labor, but for what they knew. These were societies with sophisticated water management systems, earthen dikes, sluice gates, tidal flooding timed to the moon, technique that looked almost identical to the marshes of coastal Carolina. The man credited with mastering that system is Robert F.W. Alston, planter, later governor of South Carolina, and author of the most famous treatises on Carolina rice cultivation. Here's the question worth sitting with. If the growing technique came from West Africa, why is Alston's name the one still on the history? Plantation records from this era are meticulous about property. Every acre, every barrel of rice, logged, dated, signed. The enslaved engineers who built and ran these irrigation systems appear in most surviving ledgers as numbers, property lines in a book, not names in a history. That's not an accident of the archive. A society that legally defined people as property had no incentive to record their expertise as expertise. So when we say we don't know their names, that's not a gap waiting on better research. In most cases, it's a gap the system was designed to create. Alston became famous for writing it down. The people whose generations of knowledge he was writing about mostly didn't survive the record at all. Here's the twist. The story isn't only loss. The isolation of coastal rice plantations on Carolina and Georgia's Sea Islands helped give rise to Gullah Geechee culture, descendants of enslaved West Africans who retained more of their ancestral language, foodways, and cooking traditions than almost any other African American community in the country. Gullah breakfasts still center on rice. Red rice, rice with shrimp, and yes, rice with a fried egg on top, sometimes finished with butter, sometimes with hot pepper vinegar. It's not a coincidence that this exact combination shows up in different forms all over the rice-growing world. In Japan, it's tamago kake gohan, raw or fried egg over rice. In Korea, gyeran bap. In the Philippines, silog, fried rice, egg, and cured meat. In parts of Latin America, arroz con huevo. Different continents, different names, same instinct. Rice is the base, egg is the fast, cheap protein that finishes it. Rice and eggs became one of the most common meals on the planet for a simple reason. Rice keeps, eggs are fast, and together they make a complete meal out of almost nothing. That's not an accident of taste. That's necessity, repeated independently across cultures that all figured out the same solution. By the early 20th century, Carolina's rice industry had collapsed. Hurricanes, the loss of the forced labor system it depended on, and competition from other regions, Carolina gold rice nearly went extinct as a crop. It was revived starting in the 1980s, when seed banks and heirloom grain advocates, most visibly Miller Glenn Roberts, tracked down surviving seed stock and began replanting it. Today, you can buy Carolina gold rice again, grown the way it originally was. But listen to whose name comes up in that revival story: the seed saver, the miller, not the descendants of the people whose ancestors' knowledge built the fields those seeds once grew in. The pattern didn't end with slavery, it just changed shape. So go back to that bowl, rice and egg, the simplest food you can imagine, because it's had to be for almost everyone who's ever needed a meal fast and cheap and filling. Perhaps the most remarkable part of this story isn't that America learned to grow rice, it's that the people who taught it were almost written out of the story entirely, and their names rarely survived to be written back in. The next time someone calls rice and eggs nothing food, you'll know better. It's one of the only dishes in America built on an entire industry's worth of expertise, credited to men who wrote it down, not the people who actually knew it.